welcome to today's meeting of Democrats of Greater Tucson. My name is Larry Bodine, and I'm the president of Democrats of Greater Tucson. And I'm so glad to see all of you, and I want to give you a heartfelt welcome to today's meeting. Our speaker today is Ann Chanecka, from the Tucson Department of Housing and Community Development. Give us a wave, Ann. All right, good to have you here today at our meeting. Let's get a couple of announcements first. Kathy, would you give us an update on membership, please?
You bet. I'll give you a Zoom welcome to the Democrats of Greater Tucson. Membership is progressing well. People are re-upping, if you will, and some are joining for the first time. So we always recommend that. If there's any among you who are not yet members, please just go to our DGT.org and the spot that says join now and join on up. This is the cool place for us Democrats to be. And in addition, of course, we're speaking with other Democrats, which is very, very cool. Glad you all are here, and I know we're going to enjoy our speaker too. Thank you, Larry.
All right, thank you, Kathy. Sandy, give us an update about who we've got coming up in the future at our meetings.
Okay, well, I'm Sandy Binion, and I'm a first vice chair, and I'm in charge of bringing on speakers. And so coming up in the next 3 weeks, we have Kristen Randall, who is one of the constables here in the Tucson area. Then we have Billy Kovac, who is the outreach director for Ann Kirkpatrick, and is going to tell us about what Ann has been doing and what she's working on. And then we have Miranda Schubert, who is a candidate for Ward 6. As you know, there are 3 wards where the council person is up for election this year. She is one that is running for Ward 6, opposing Steve Kovacek. So please tune in to those, and there'll be more coming up.
All right, thank you so much, Sandy. Well, with that, let me introduce our speaker today. We have Ann Chanecka, who is a deputy director in the Tucson Department of Housing and Community Development. She has a master's degree in public administration from the University of Arizona, and she was a Peace Corps volunteer in Madagascar.
Oh my.
Now, here in Tucson, homelessness has spiked more than 60% from 2019 to 2020. So that's 1 year. And 105 of those people on the streets are kids. So Ann will talk about how the Department of Housing and Community Development is tackling 6 major issues: poverty rates, economic mobility, health disparities, homelessness, housing instability, and neighborhood inequities. Ann, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Larry, and thanks to the Democrats of Greater Tucson for having me today. I'll say I've been in Tucson over 15 years, and it's nice to see folks I am not familiar with and know that there's some great like-minded people out there in Tucson. Have a short presentation, and then I'll leave time, well, medium to short presentation, and then I'll leave some time for questions. But so as Larry mentioned, I work for the City of Tucson Housing and Community Development. I will admit I have been with this department less than a year, so I am not an expert at these issues, but I'm looking at them with fresh eyes. My background is more transportation and urban planning, and so I look at housing in the context of creating great cities. And so I think in some ways that gives me this fresh perspective that I'll talk a little bit about today. So the Department of Housing and Community Development, I may refer to a bit as HCD. The department works primarily in these 3 areas: people, communities, and homes. One thing I'll talk about today is a planning process that we did this year called the People, Communities, and Homes Investment Plan, or PCHIP. And as part of that process, we realized that these are the three areas that our department really focuses on. So on the people side, we look to invest in low income and marginalized individuals and families. So hoping to improve equitable access to jobs, education, healthcare, really all of the things that we know are important for safe, fulfilled lives. The second area, communities, we recognize that individuals and families live in this larger social context. And so we look to support neighborhoods, nonprofit organizations, faith-based communities, really this greater infrastructure that supports individuals and families. And then lastly, homes. We are a housing authority, which means we own and operate public housing units, but we also have other housing initiatives that we work on as well. And I don't often share this story, but I think this is a group that will appreciate. As part of the People, Communities, and Homes Investment Plan, we often refer to a term that our department supports an infrastructure of opportunity. And I bring it up because this infrastructure of opportunity term came from, I am a big fan of Julian Castro. I have followed him with his time as HUD secretary, and he has a podcast that I find incredible. And the first episode of his podcast, he had his brother, Joaquin Castro, on. And it was Joaquin Castro that talked about how government's role is to work on physical infrastructure. So making sure that your roads are paved and safe, making sure bridges are maintained, making sure water lines are safe. And so it was him who said, in addition to that, it is up to the government to support an infrastructure of opportunity. So we think about the work we do at the Department of Housing and Community Development in terms of supporting this infrastructure of opportunity. So how do we do that? So the department, some of you may be familiar with the department, some of you may be less so. As I mentioned, we are a public housing agency. That means we own and operate over 1,500 units of public housing. Some of that is apartment complexes for older adults and persons with disabilities. Some are for families. And then we also own and operate over 500 single-family homes across Tucson. We also administer the region's Section 8 or voucher program. So what that means is we administer over 6,000 vouchers. And those vouchers allow for a household to rent from a private landlord, but then only pay 30 to 40% of their income for that housing. And then the voucher turns into a subsidy to make up that difference and pay the private landlord what that difference is. In the past, the department has had some criticism in terms of not meeting expectations of landlords. And I bring that up for two reasons. We have a new director. Her name is Liz Morales. She's been with the department for a year, and she has really made improvements that has made our Section 8 program better. And I'll talk about some of those in a moment. The other area in terms of housing outside of the federal programs, which is the public housing in the Section 8, we also own and operate additional units within the city. And I bring this up for a few different reasons. One is really appreciative for our mayor and the Tucson mayor and council. They are really supportive of the initiatives of our department. And one of the things we've been asked to do is really look to expand affordable housing options in the region. And so this is a particular area that I will be focused on quite a bit over the next couple of years, is really looking at how do we as a city promote more affordable housing. So we have the housing side of our house. We also have another division that's called Planning and Community Development. So the city receives federal funding to support those people, communities, and homes initiatives. You might have heard of Community Development Block Grant funding. That's funding where we can support things like services that our nonprofits administer. We can support public facilities such as parks, daycare centers, healthcare clinics. And then there are additional programs such as housing rehabilitation for older adults. And then affordable housing, we have a separate funding that's called Home Investment Partnership, where we can support new affordable housing projects. So these pictures on this slide are a good sample of the types of work that we work on, that we support. So on the bottom left there, that is a relatively new affordable housing building for older adults in downtown Tucson. There was several different funding sources that went in to make that project happen, including the City of Tucson home funding. That middle picture is a older adult breakfast program run out of Quincy Douglas. So provides nutritious meals for older adults and then a chance to get together and socialize. And on the bottom right is a park, a playground with a shade structure. We can support neighborhood enhancement projects such as that as well. And then in terms of what the department does, I did want to bring up, as I appreciated Larry's introduction talking about homelessness being on the rise in terms of issues that we really are looking to address. So the city plays a lead role in the area's coalition to end homelessness. So there is a coalition made up of government agencies, nonprofit groups, faith-based organizations, and businesses, all coming together to really work on the homelessness issue. This is a separate board from the City of Tucson, so it is not the City of Tucson Mayor Council that make up this board, but the city does play a lead role in terms of working with housing and urban development and the funding they receive to help with this coalition. As I mentioned, I'm new to the department. This is an area where I'd say I was surprised by how many programs there are and just how much work is being done to address homelessness and how we don't hear about it as much as we might. So that was an overview in general of how our department works. Wanted to bring up some most recent initiatives and what we're looking at moving forward in terms of tackling those challenges that Larry laid out. So this past year, you can imagine that the department, being a department that works with vulnerable individuals, spent much of the past year focused on COVID. And so we recently put out an annual report. There's a bunch of information in there. Wanted to bring up some highlights from that report. Fortunately, did receive money from the federal government to work on some specific programs to try to help vulnerable populations through this pandemic. So for instance, early in the pandemic, the city partnered with the county and with some community groups to set up a hotel shelter service for individuals experiencing homelessness. So recognizing that that community is vulnerable due to age, underlying health conditions, and then having there be close quarters at local shelters, the city took a lead role in setting up this shelter service. In 2020, almost 1,000 people were sheltered through this program. And one great piece of information is over 300 of those were connected to permanent housing and now have permanent housing that were staying in one of the shelters, in one of the hotel shelters. Another area through the COVID pandemic, we've been getting funds to help with rent and utility assistance. Here are some stats from 2020 from that program, and I'll say we learned a lot. And we're about to roll out, I'd say, the 2.0 version of this program, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And then here are some other statistics from our 2020 annual report. I mentioned that one of the things we're really working on is having a better Section 8 voucher program. So on the left there, landlords were complaining about when they signed up to be a Section 8 landlord, it took a long time to get their first payment. And so it used to take 39 days, and now it's down to 15 days in terms of getting the first payment when landlords agree to take Section 8 vouchers. Similarly, there were some complaints about the inspection time. In order to take Section 8 vouchers, there has to be an inspection period. That used to take 13 days, and now it's down to 4 days. So really looking at trying to improve the Section 8 program. With that, 925 families were offered housing this past year as part of the Section 8 program. We're now at 99% voucher utilization, which means we were able to increase some funding for that program this past year. I mentioned the work that we do with homelessness. This past year, we hired some outreach staff to go out and talk to individuals experiencing homelessness. And last year, there were 655 contacts made through that program, and it resulted in 255 of them receiving housing. And then we often partner with community groups to try to make sure that the needs of older adults are taken care of. So through the pandemic, we partnered with Pima Council on Aging and helped support their program, which provided 13,000 meals to local older adults. I mentioned the People, Communities, and Homes Investment Plan. This is another initiative we rolled out in 2020. In addition to dealing with the immediate crisis, we wanted to think about what does this look like moving forward. And so we put together this plan, which is a roadmap for the department for the next 5 years. And so this plan is available on our website. There's a lot of information in this plan. And so to summarize what the process was and what it's going to do in terms of guiding us for the future, there are 4 sections to the plan. The first section is the inputs, which the goal there was to tie together a lot of different efforts. We definitely didn't want to invent the wheel. So looking at what mayor and council have stated as their priorities, looking at the city's general plan and a few other plans, really trying to think about what that means for our department and what it means for moving forward. The second section of the plan dives into the data and really looks at those 6 areas that Larry outlined. When you look at the data, you see poverty being a huge issue in Tucson, education and economic mobility as a challenge, health and healthcare disparities, homelessness, housing instability, and neighborhood inequities. And so based on the data, those 6 areas arose in addition to the community input in the planning documents from the past. So those are the 6 areas that we're really looking to make progress on. So with that, we move into this blue section, which is the priorities and goals. And we identified 11 priorities across those 3 focus areas. And while the priorities in some cases are lofty, there are strategies outlined within those priorities and goals to try to help address those issues and really start to make progress on those challenge areas. And then the last section is implementation. This plan is not intended to just be a plan that sits on a shelf, but really how do we operationalize what's in it so that we can make progress and track progress moving forward. I mentioned the data section. For those that are data nerds and really want to see more in terms of why those 6 areas were identified, we have a ton of charts and information in this plan. Here's an example of two charts in the poverty area. On the left is a chart looking at the percent of population living below poverty over the past 5 years. And then on the right is looking at poverty by race and ethnicity. One thing that was really important to us in this plan is looking at disparities across race and ethnicity and really looking to see how we can make progress on structural injustices over the next 5 to 10 years. In terms of implementation, we're looking at how to incorporate this plan and what we're doing moving forward. So an example of that is we currently have a call for projects out, which means that we put out essentially grant application process for nonprofits to really help us achieve the goals outlined in the PCHIP plan. And so we released this grant application call for projects the end of January, and the end of February, nonprofits could submit project proposals to help us meet those goals. We currently have a selection committee that is evaluating those proposals. And in a couple weeks, we'll go to mayor and council with funding recommendations. For this particular call for projects, we focused on the people part of the people's communities and homes. And so this chart shows an annual funding estimate of how much money we have. So for this particular grant process, we had a little bit over $3 million set aside to support community nonprofits working in this area. So that's an example of how we're taking the money that we get and really trying to address those 6 areas and move that forward. And I see there's a question now. Larry, do you want to take questions now, or do we want to wait to the end? Both. I'm pretty informal, but I'd say feel free to jump in, Jacqueline.
Yeah, I had heard about a program with a private insurance company that was beginning to use victims of drug addiction and victims of homelessness to train them to reach out to other people in that situation. I'm wondering, are you using the people you help as a resource to expand your services?
Yeah, that's a good question. And short answer is I would say yes. Long answer is I think that we still can improve in that area and look to do more of that moving forward. So really that lived experience I think is so important. And so I'll say one thing that I'm really working on doing is how do we use people who have experience and pay them to support other people in terms of getting signed up for these services.
It was extremely successful because they had the experience of getting off drugs, of remaining stable, and they could really relate to who they were talking to. Thank you.
Yeah, and feel free to send me out. On the end, I have my email address. Feel free to send me information. I always love learning about more programs that might be helpful.
Okay.
So in terms of the PCHIP implementation, we'll be at Mayor and Council in a couple of weeks with the list of funding recommendations. Not surprising, there's always more proposals and more need out there than we're able to support each year. So over time, really hoping to grow the pie in terms of how much is available to support these types of programs. So in terms of a few other initiatives, I'm going to bring up before I stop to take questions. Other initiatives that Mayor and Council have set up over the past year or so. One is the Commission on Equitable Housing and Development. So there used to be a housing commission. It was defunct for a few different reasons, and Mayor and Council, recognizing this is a growing concern in the community, put together this commission to really help guide the city decisions when it relates to these issues. So on the left are 5 focus areas the commission's charged with thinking about. And on the right was the mission that was created that was developed in the creation of the commission. The commission is brand new. They just had their second meeting. The next meeting is the second Tuesday of April. I believe it's April 13th. All of those commission meetings are open to the public, and anyone who's interested in those topics are welcome to join. There's always a call to the audience if people have specific topics they'd like the commission to talk about. One of the things I'm hoping the commission will help us with is developing an affordable housing strategy for our community moving forward. This is something that, for instance, Phoenix has recently released a housing plan. The plan is based on data. So Phoenix did a lot of information on what the current market looks like in Phoenix, and then developed targets for affordable housing and strategies to get there. On our end, we're partnering with University of Arizona in Pima County. We are wrapping up a housing market study. There's a website where this information lives. The market study has 3 phases. The first phase was a neighborhood vulnerability index to look at the Tucson neighborhoods and look at particular areas across the city that are more vulnerable to shocks such as, say, a pandemic. We started this work before COVID, and it just seemed to be very timely in terms of what was put into the market study. The second phase is a housing market assessment, and that is a deep dive into what our market looks like. So for instance, there's information on home prices across the region and changes in home prices, housing cost burden. This map here is the percent change in media rent prices across the city. So where are rents going up as compared to other areas. There's information on housing, such as vacancy rates, construction, building permits, just a ton of information. And then what we're doing now is wrapping up a gap analysis, which looks at what are the current conditions and where is the demand and what is the need in terms of moving forward. That information, that gap analysis, will be released sometime in March. And then another program that is actually on Mayor and Council agenda tomorrow, the city got additional funding from the federal government for eviction prevention and rent and utility support. And so this time around, the city has more than $16 million. And what's great is learned a lot from what I would say was the 1.0 version of the rent and utility assistance program. The second time around, the city is partnering with Pima County so that there is one application portal. So anyone in the region who meets the eligibility, which includes having a financial hardship due to COVID, and there are some other eligibility criteria, go to one place to apply. So in the past, there were separate application processes and portals, and it got really confusing for people that needed help. So partnering with the Community Investment Corporation, who is running this program, really hoping that this is a seamless program to really support people moving forward between the city and county. Right now, there's over $30 million allocated to this program. And as things evolve at the federal level, we anticipate there could be more funding given the eviction crisis that is looming ahead of us. One other program I wanted to bring up, because I think that this is one that has a lot of potential for the next year or two. It's called the Choice Neighborhoods Project. And I bring this up because I think this can be a model for supporting people in neighborhoods, and also really thinking about the people, communities, homes in an integrated process. So the Choice Neighborhoods planning process looks at this area on the map right there and really is looking at how do we support the people, the neighborhoods, and then the Tucson House is our target housing site. It's over 407 units of public housing in the city. The Tucson House needs to be rehabilitated. So looking at this as an opportunity to potentially bring in mixed income development while really supporting the public housing residents. So excited about the potential of this project over the next couple of years. The city will be applying for a $35 million grant from the federal government that we're really hoping to get to support this area in terms of infrastructure, both public infrastructure, infrastructure of opportunity, and rehabilitating the Tucson House. And then last, I did want to end with, if you're interested in the types of projects that I brought up, we do have a brand new newsletter for our department. One of the areas I've been charged with is trying to be more proactive about communicating what we do. So we do have, we just released our first newsletter, the March newsletter. that highlights a lot of the work we're doing. We're planning on doing that about monthly. We're working on getting a sign up on our website, but in the meantime, I did give an email address to Rachel Hutchinson, who can get you signed up for the newsletter moving forward if these types of projects are something you're interested in learning about. And so that's all I have. I am going to stop sharing my screen and happy to take questions from you all.
All right, we have 4 people who would like to ask a question. Let's start with Jeremy Lasher. Jeremy, go ahead.
Hi, Ann, thanks. So it looked like you guys have about roughly 2,000 housing units that either you cover completely or you are able to put like reduced rent for folks who are experiencing some economic hardship. Knowing that the number is going to change on a day-to-day basis, about what percentage of the folks who need the assistance are we able to meet in the city of Tucson or in Pima County?
Good question, and I would say not enough is the short answer. The housing market study looks at what percentage of our population is housing cost burdened, meaning paying more than 30% of their income towards basic housing costs. And particularly at the lower income level, it's a substantial portion of our community. So I can't give you a hard number, but I would say we're not able to cover nearly the amount of support that's needed out there.
Follow up on that with the new monies that you have coming in from the city and from the grants you got. What do you think further you'll be able to cover? Is it like you'll be able to double what you're doing right now? Is it like you can see a 10% increase on what you're able to do right now?
I think short term, we're hoping the money can really help with the crisis and keep people in their homes, but that is a short term solution. That long term, really trying to figure out how to take the money available and come up with the fixing the root cause solutions. And so again, hopefully short term, it's going to keep the majority of people in their housing, but long term, really needing to look at different approaches.
Thanks.
Paul Stapleton Smith has a question. Paul, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you, Ann, for this presentation. And this goes to what you just suggested about the root cause of this problem. I had put a question into the chat earlier. What is the narrative? What is the understanding with you and broadly the city of Tucson and what truly represents the prices of an affordable rental and the prices for single family homes? And then the follow-on to that is the inventory of available housing. I just came off of the eviction prevention collaboration. I serve on that collaboration with county and Ken and all the folks that you work with CIC. We have our finger in the dike here. I'm not telling you what you don't know, but what is it that we're to understand about what the appropriate inventory and the actual prices, not the Arizona Association of Realtors concept of what a home price is, which is high, right, exceeds inflation. And I'm not trying to be adversarial with you, Ann. I really admire the work that you're doing, but please define this, quote, root problem so we can stop just putting our finger in the dike year after year after year.
No, I appreciate that, Paul. And I'll say, part of why I started saying that I'm not a housing expert, I think in part gives me the opportunity to look at this with fresh eyes. And digging into that housing market data for the past year, I feel like a few key things, and this is my own personal opinion, have come to light for me. One is, I think if I were to pinpoint one issue for Tucson that causes a stream of other issues, it's our poverty and the low access to good paying jobs. And I say that because the housing market study, you ask about the inventory, this gap analysis is going to release information that I found incredibly helpful in thinking about how to plan for the future. It looks at the inventory. It takes the households in the whole region by income bracket, looks at the available units by cost, and looks to see what's happening overall, comprehensive analysis. What it has found is that today, the inventory in terms of the number of units meets the demand of the number of households in the region. So technically, the supply overall units meets the number of households. When you dig into that, though, what it shows is it does not meet the affordable household demand. So what we're seeing is people in lower income, households that have less than $50,000 a year are housing cost burdened. They're paying way more for their housing than they can afford. So, and I will say that supply is today's demand. We know that with COVID, we see some possibilities of more people moving here. So the other thing we know is there's an incredible amount of older housing stock in the region that is likely questionable when it comes to meeting health and safety. So to me, there's a few different things we're finding. We're finding that can we try to, in addition to building new affordable housing units, can we try to look to subsidize more in terms of having people and lower incomes have them be able to afford the units that are there today? So questions that we're grappling with and trying to figure that out. Really excited to release this study that shares this. So I think it's a multifaceted solution, building new affordable housing, but also looking to better take advantage of the rehabilitation programs and meeting the cost of housing for lower income families.
Barbara Warren, go ahead and ask your question.
I have 3 questions or 3 parts to my question. One is, I think the figures were right that about 400 or 600 people are homeless still. What happens to those people? Where are they living? How are they being helped to survive? The second thing is, are you dealing with manufactured homes in any of your work? And if so, how is that playing out? And the third part is, how do we get in touch with you regarding funding for emergency preparedness? And are you interested at all in how residents in our community, and especially low-income communities, deal with extreme heat in our community? We have educational materials to offer through my organization, which is PSR.
I'll start with that last one. Yes, definitely always interested in either partnering or communicating the work that people are doing to support families in Tucson. And I'll say, I'll put my contact information in the chat. Feel free to reach out to me at any point. In terms of manufactured housing, that is something that I see some potential in moving forward. And actually, the Ward 6 Council Office is looking to pilot a project using manufactured housing and trying to meet the housing demand. So something that I think we can look at more moving forward. Your homelessness question is harder. The data shows quite a bit more than the 600 people are living on our streets today. There's more. The PCHIP plan has a lot of information about homelessness and the changing numbers. I think that this is an area that we have really taking a housing first approach, looking at supporting more and trying to do more permanent supportive housing over time, where try to get people in, get them a roof over their head now, and then try to get the wraparound services that go with that. And I think that's an area that we will be looking at trying to improve over the next couple of years and partnering with more permanent supportive housing projects. And so,
Are there people who totally resist being put into any kind of housing?
Yeah, I think, like most things, there's different reasons why people are homeless, and there are definitely people who just really don't feel like those programs are for them. But there are a lot of other people that are interested in those services. And the hotel shelters project, I think, highlights that if you can provide shelter and services with it, it can work.
Thank you.
Steve Linder is the DGT president. Steve, go ahead and ask your question.
You're the president. I'm the
You're the treasurer. Accidentally promoted you.
Yeah, all right. I guess my question is back to, again, with the homeless. I'm glad that you're doing whatever you can to find them homes. But my question is, because homelessness has so many other problems involved with it, including unemployment, drug addiction, mental illness, domestic abuse, all of that. My question is, once you find homes for these people, are you giving them the support so that they remain? And the question is, what is the recidivist as far as do a lot of these people remain in these homes, or do some end up back in the street because they're not getting the support they need to live in these homes? What's going on with that?
It'll be interesting given the hotel program and how many people we were able to get into housing through that program, to track those folks over time. Are they getting the help that they need, and are they staying in housing? So that's something that I'm interested in tracking. I would say to date, it's a mix of people who have received services and are able to stay in their housing, and others who have fallen through the cracks and lose their housing. So really looking at, mayor and council have established a housing first policy direction at, let's get people in housing, and then let's provide the wraparound services to support them in that. So I know I'm looking at a few different projects to try to expand the permanent supportive housing models and really try to do more of that. One thing I'll say, Larry, I really appreciated hearing that you're going to have a constable coming to report on the eviction prevention efforts. I think the constable, somebody like Kristen Randall, I think working more collaboratively with the constables will really prevent homelessness. People that are on that cusp of potentially being evicted or not. The more we can work with the constables and get people before they fall into homelessness, the better. So I see a lot of potential with that type of collaboration moving forward. And she is somebody that I think will be incredible in terms of outlining the eviction prevention efforts and what we can do moving forward.
We have a question from Andrea Kennedy. Please go ahead.
Hi, and I don't know if this is a cause, but something I've observed since I moved here in '74, part of which time I spent as a landlady, was when I first moved here, I started to see real estate agents fix up houses and sell them higher prices. And then the people who moved, who like to flip houses kind of moved in en masse. And I just remember that it seems like when I moved here, there were more little modest homes and little apartment complexes and bigger apartment complexes that were modest and they were affordable. And what I noticed is a lot of them, and I'm talking about Midtown-ish area because that's where I lived. I went to the U and I've lived around in that area since then. And what I saw is a lot of these places disappear. Either they were redone, so they were more expensive to live in. They were resold for more money, making, the price of a lot of houses go up around them. Or they were knocked down and something else was built there. They did something else with the land. And I wondered if that was, I think that's, personally, I think that's the cause of the lack of affordable housing, but maybe I'm seeing an effect. I don't know. I wanted to know what you think. And the second thing I was wondering about was can't remember the name now, is a renewal program for the West Side that you showed us at the very end. How do we make sure the money goes to people that need it and not to developers looking for a bonanza? Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. I think you brought up a few different points. One being not having enough, I think your term was modest housing options. And I'll say what the data, back to the housing market study, I tend to gravitate towards data, which can also be qualitative information. But one thing we're finding is compared to peer Western cities, Tucson is by and large still affordable in terms of there's about 13, the map dashboard at U of A tracks Tucson against 13 peer cities. What we found is compared to those 13 peer cities, I think Tucson was still the second or third most affordable in terms of average rent and average home prices. Albuquerque, I think, was one of the only ones that was cheaper. That said, what the map dashboard data is also showing us is that that's really changing, and the rate of rent increases and mortgage increases is going up compared to many of those 13 peer cities. So essentially what we're finding is the data is pointing to the cost of living is increasing quite a bit, and what we know to date is jobs and the money to support that is not growing with the increase. So I think that there's something to be said for your comment about there's not enough affordable units to meet that demand. If anyone people in this group may have attended, the city recently did some community engagement around a potential ordinance change called the what we're calling an accessory dwelling unit ordinance, which is an ADU, or ADU for accessory dwelling unit. That's short for that. And what that means is, like many other cities have done, we're looking at how to make ADUs legal and easier in the city. So what that means is that people would be able to build granny flats or an accessory unit on their property to help support the housing need. And this is something we've seen other cities do really successfully. We're researching how do we, some cities have requirements or incentives to have those units stay affordable. And so really exploring those changes now. And I bring this up because this is an ordinance change that mayor and council are considering now. There was just a round of engagement centered around it, and there will be more engagement moving forward. But I will say, I think that type of infill can be really important to meeting the demand moving forward. So I'm really glad you brought that up.
We have a question from Lynn Hudson. Lynn, go ahead.
Thank you. And when I was looking at your data, one of the pieces of information sort of leapt out at me, and that was that the eviction rate in Tucson seems to be almost 3 times what it is nationally. And then in responding to Paul and some of these other questions, you were talking about 13 cities, peer cities. Are those 13 peer cities, when you're looking at affordable housing, do you take into account the salaries of people that people make in all those cities? And because that has to be part of the equation, it seems to me. I think you're onto something, basically, that people just can't afford what we have, even if the rates seem reasonable and quote affordable.
Yeah, and Kristen will provide good data on this. Something that leapt out, and Paul, your work on the eviction prevention task force, something that leapt out to me is almost all of the evictions are due to lack of affording. So financial reasons. It's not having to do with breach of contract or those things, but it comes down to not being able to afford the rent. So I do think the job situation is really important, and also education. I come from New York State, where we really support, where New York really supports the education system. And so I think there's something to be said for this whole infrastructure of opportunity as a system, and how do we set people up from day one on a path that can help them succeed. So all these things tied together. I wish I had more answers than I do, but trying to dig into it.
All right, Jackie Romer has a question. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
Thank you. Yes, Lynn kind of opened the door to my question. I find it very frustrating to, to listen to a kind of isolated a problem that seems to be, one that always needs more funding. And I'm just curious if you have linked yourself to a $15 minimum wage in any way that can be used as political pressure, as as this is why we need $15 an hour for people. This is why, and we are linked to that. It's about housing. It's about because Kristen Sinema, who was originally for this, is now no longer for it, and I feel we need to start connecting these dots, like, Paul looking at the original cause, Stephen brought up something related to that, and then Lynn's question directly hits that. But is your department linking with other political agendas to push to make this happen on other levels?
So there are limitations in terms of what we can do as government, public agencies. Mayor and council are absolutely the ones, and they've been a big fan. They recently changed the rules at the city, so permanent city employees now have a minimum wage of $15 an hour. So I would say mayor and council absolutely have been champions, and I agree with you. Trying to connect these dots is really important. I'll say I'm familiar that there is a group that submitted for a $15 an hour minimum wage increase for that we'll be putting on the ballot for Tucson voters, and I think that we can provide data and information, but some restrictions to what we can do in terms of advocating and getting into the political space. One thing, you mentioned this connecting the dots, and I realized I didn't answer a part of, I think it was Amanda's question earlier about the project that I'm working on and how do we bring investment to an area without displacing the people that are there and making it hard for the people that have been there. And I'll say that's a big emphasis that we're working on with the commission is how do we increase wages and jobs and make improvements in neighborhoods and still have them be affordable for the people that are there. A good example of this is the city has received a planning grant from the Federal Transit Authority to study a corridor from the Tucson Mall to downtown to the airport to potentially add light rail and or bus rapid transit, some sort of transportation solution. And so as part of the money, we're looking at how do you improve, in this case, a key transit corridor while also investing in the people that are there and providing affordable choices. So definitely something that's on our radar, and definitely something that we've seen some other communities not do very well. So trying to learn from them. So for instance, Austin is one that we've been looking at that became really expensive really quickly and really displaced a lot of residents there. So hoping to learn from other cities in that regard as well.
Mike O'Brien, one of our board members, has a question. Go ahead, Mike.
Yes. Some cities have been eliminating single-family housing zoning as a means of improving the availability of affordable housing. Has there been any discussion, consideration, or planning towards such a policy in Tucson?
Good question, and I've definitely kept my eyes on that in some other cities. And so quick overview for those that aren't familiar, I would say cities are changing the zoning so that you're not restricted to single family zoning in parts of towns. So for instance, I think Minneapolis was the first that did this, and Oregon and some places in California are doing this. So essentially you could start building duplexes, in some cases triplexes, in some cases 4-unit buildings in what had traditionally been single family zoning. So I think there's potential there. I think that there has not been talk about that to date at the city, but the general plan will be up for renewal, and really looking at the city's general plan that advises land use. I think that's something that could be considered. And I also think that what I've seen in Tucson is there may be some real reluctance to support that. There are still neighborhoods that really want to keep the character of the neighborhood. And so I think that that's a discussion that could be had. I see potential in it. And I think you can do density in a way that does maintain the character of neighborhoods. You know, density doesn't have to necessarily mean a 20-story building next to you. It could mean a duplex in a way that really integrates well with the single family houses. So good question, Michael. Something that I think if there were folks in the community that were supportive of that, it would be really good to hear that in the Plan Tucson update process that will start to unfold.
Okay, we have time for one final question, and that will be from Jeremy Lasher. Go ahead.
Thanks, Larry. Yeah, thank you so much. This has been a great conversation on this and a lot of good information. Tying in that we'll be talking with one of the constables next week. Some independent organizations here in Tucson have looked at the cost of providing counsel for people facing evictions. It'd be a little under $1 million per year. Tucson's in a weird situation where the county handles all the evictions, but the vast majority of them actually happen inside City of Tucson limits. In your opinion, would there be any movement at the city budgetary level and maybe from some of the departments like housing on trying to get the city to pay for the cost of eviction counsel for those facing evictions? Because the cost to somebody who goes through an eviction is so sky high that it takes on average 7 years for them to recover that and get back to the point they were before the eviction. Just the amount of money we could save in the community if we allowed people to stay in their homes would be huge. What do you think the housing department in the city, or more the city as a whole, could do to try and mitigate those costs?
Yeah, some of that information you shared in terms of the data is new to me. We've been helped support U of A's study on the true cost of eviction. And I think you're absolutely right that if it's really expensive and costs our community a lot of money every time somebody's evicted. And I think U of A has tried really hard to capture that cost. And so if there are programs such as eviction counseling that we can support before people get evicted, it's something we're certainly looking at doing. Of course, always a challenge in terms of how much funding there is, but I know this group, I can say in this group, I'm encouraged at the federal level and what resources might be available to help. And so really hoping that with the Biden administration, we can start to see some progress in these areas.
Thank you.
And I want to thank you very much for coming to today's meeting of Democrats of Greater Tucson. This has been a very informative program. Wonder if you can bring us to a conclusion by telling us how people can get a hold of you and how members of Democrats of Greater Tucson can support you.
Yeah, I am putting my email in the chat and my phone number. So I really appreciate this conversation and great questions. And as I said, it's nice to talk with like-minded people. And so if you do have ideas, ways you can support and ideas such as some that you brought up, don't hesitate to reach out to me, and thank you.
Well, that brings our meeting to a close. I want to thank everybody for attending, and special thanks again to Ann Chanecka for being our speaker today. And for everyone else, I want to wish you a terrific day, and thanks so much for coming.